live now. So
All right.
yeah. Sorry for the late start, guys. They were all kind of sick, and so we're all sort of playing hurt, but we'll be all right. We'll be all right because it's the holidays. You can't really tell back behind me, but this is these are R2D2 Christmas lights that I have here, um, which are part of my set decoration for today. But it doesn't you can't really tell on this thing, but they look kind of cool. Um, we're gonna start off with a little bit of Christmas movies and traditions because we are 2 days before Christmas. If you're listening to it, it's at a different time. Um, so this is the for me. It's funny. We have a lot. Of course we have It's a Wonderful Life, which we watch on Christmas Eve. But the problem with It's a Wonderful Life with our kids, I think I talked about this on another show or somewhere maybe with friends at one point, is It's a Wonderful Life is a long movie. Like when you watch the original It's a Wonderful Life, it's a long movie. And it takes a long time for the payoff of the happiness at the end. Like we did talk about this, right? So yeah, so my kids have never seen the end of It's a Wonderful Life. But there's also a remake of It's a Wonderful Life called It Happened One Christmas. You ever seen this one?
Yep.
And that was what's her name? She's it's played by the woman. Oh gosh, very famous Sally Field. I want to say.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's Sally Field plays like a female version of this. That's a good one too. But my all-time favorite is my favorite for a very weird reason because I couldn't sleep when I was a kid on Christmas Eve ever, and I used to sneak a black and white TV into my room and watch The Bells of St. Mary, which is really hardcore old-time Christmas. And it always plays at midnight for some reason in the Philadelphia area. So if you ever want to watch a Christmas movie that's like from the 1920s, they barely had motion picture technology when they made it.
No, I think it's the 40s.
It's early though. It's early in the movie.
What's the guy's name? It's Fitzgerald or
yeah. I mean, it's
something like that. Yeah.
It's hardcore old. I mean, and it's boring as hell. I mean, it was like, and it was my.
Now,
Wait a second. I thought we were recommending these things.
I know. For whatever reason, because I couldn't sleep, this was like my sedative to try to fall asleep was The Bells of St. Mary. And I wasn't allowed to watch TV in my room, but I would sneak a little TV in there and try to watch this because I knew what was best and my parents didn't. I knew this would get me to sleep.
Yeah, is that the one with Bing Crosby? It's the old priest and the young priest.
Yes, Bing Crosby is in it. Yes, he is. But he's really he's like 10 years or 20 years younger than he was when he did White Christmas. I mean, it's totally. Yeah. I mean, this is a young Bing Crosby. That's how old this movie is. So it's White Christmas is great too, and also incredibly boring and long. But just something about these long, boring Christmas movies that I like. What do you got, Eric? Do you have any of these?
Well, you know what? First of all, Christmas Eve was not a time that we ever watched movies because our family's from Europe. My parents emigrated to Canada from Austria. So Christmas Eve was like the big thing when we were kids, right? I mean, that was the night that you opened presents because Christmas Day was always set aside for church and dinner and things like that. So I have more fond memories of Christmas Eve than I do of Christmas Day because we would gather as a family like real early and we'd have a type of meal about 5:30, like lemon sausages and things like that, and presents. And so that was really cool. Like all the other kids in the neighborhood had to wait until Christmas Day to open their presents. We opened ours on Christmas Eve. And then there was 3 of our families. Like my aunt and uncle always lived next door to us, and my other aunt and uncle lived fairly close by, and the families were really close. Like my cousins were like brothers. We grew up together, and so the way it would work was that one year, one of the 3 families would host Christmas Eve, and one year, one of the families would host Christmas Day, and then somebody would get a bye in the third, and it would rotate like that. So on the years that we would host Christmas Eve, you'd open the presents, and then the families would come, and then we'd have carol singing, and we used to have this so that a lot of times there would be the German carols, and then we had this old scratchy Sing Along with Mitch Christmas album. And in those days, the vinyl, as Kevin's kids used to call it, the vinyl, came with song sheets. So my grandmothers never actually learned English, although they kind of knew it from watching soap operas. But we would be singing along with Mitch on Christmas Eve, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so I've been able to find some of these sing along with Mitch things on iTunes. You can actually get Mitch Miller and the Sing Along Gang on iTunes. So I've downloaded those things, and although I don't inflict that on my kids, I sometimes, like after everyone's gone to bed, instead of watching grainy old black and white movies, I listen to German Christmas carols and sing along with Mitch, because that conjures up my childhood for me.
I love it. I love it. So what's an Ann Arbor Christmas, Kevin?
Well, we used to sing along with Mitch too.
No way.
My grandmother was real big. That was on. I can't remember what night that was on that Mitch was on, but and Lawrence Welk, he had a Christmas special every year, and my grandma would make us watch it. But very similar. Christmas Eve was much bigger when I was a kid than Christmas Day. I was a Catholic kid, so midnight mass was a staple. And you had to stay up, and when you're 6 and 7, that's a hard march. That's a tough march to get through that. But I was struck. I mentioned this before, like the idea that there'd be a meal planned at 2 in the morning of roast beef and just craziness. And you go to bed about 4 o'clock, so the Christmas Day celebration would start about 11 or 12. You'd do all that, but you're allowed on Christmas Eve to open one presents, but you can negotiate up to 2 and work it, and we did. And then I've actually discovered that I thought once my kids got older that would be the end of the sort of fun aspect of Christmas, but it really hasn't. Like my kids still are all in their 20s, and I've got my oldest is 30 now, and everybody comes home still.
Wow.
And we have just other traditions now. Probably 7 or 8 years ago, on Christmas Eve, we had, my in-laws would come in, and that there seemed to be sort of a lull on Christmas Eve in the afternoon and morning of what we would do, and so I put together the annual Allen Christmas bowling tournament, and what I did is I bought a bunch of, and we don't bowl. I mean, I bowl once a year on Christmas Eve. And I bought a bunch of lottery tickets, and if you get a strike, you get a lottery ticket. And again, I buy lottery tickets once a year on Christmas.
Right.
So it's kind of fun. We have a big pile of them, and then I have prizes. I get gift cards, and it's not who scores the highest. It's the average, the mean score of the day.
Right.
The top prize, or guess the average of all the people, and we've expanded it. It's all my Allens plus my in-laws, my sister-in-law and her husband, and we've invited a few friends. So we've had as many as we always have a minimum of like 14 or so, or 15, and we've had probably as many as 20 or 22, 23 people come to this big event. And then I've expanded even more. My kids all play I call it hardcore trivia, where they're in competitions, because they're my kids, so they know a lot of goofy
Of course,
stuff.
yes, no question about that.
They're in leagues and tournaments and things. So what do? I created the Reindeer Games, which we do sometime during Christmas week, where it's sort of a trivia contest and brain teasers, and I kind of put it all together, and they all compete, and it's basically it just gets us together, and it just gives us a reason to kind of hang out. So
that's fantastic.
That's our Christmas.
I love that.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, that reminds me though, Kevin. That's exactly what's happened in our family too. So the tradition that I was outlining, that was me as a kid. But what ended up happening was, so Mary and I got married, and their tradition, of course, was different. It was more traditional. So what we did was when our own family tradition evolved, we took bits and pieces out of each of them. So what we decided we would do is that, as our kids got older, that on Christmas Eve, you'd open presents from the Duhacek side of the family, right? So that would be about and then Christmas morning, they'd open presents from the Logan side of the family. And this was ideal. Of course, kids this age, there's tons of presents from both sides of the family. And so they would have like half of their Christmas, on Christmas Eve, and then the other half on Christmas Day. It worked out great, and all of their friends, it was an either-or proposition, and everyone thought that ours was the best alternative, because you don't have that anxiety or that, I'm not even sure if it's anxiety, but it's so hard to sleep, as you were talking about, on Christmas, because you're waiting for that. So you have a little bit of that purge by opening some of your presents, but you still have presents to look forward to on Christmas Day. So that's how, and we still continue to do that right now. And then the other thing that we've done, we do exactly what you do, Kevin, except instead of bowling, we play shinny. And we some of our friends in Calgary have some pretty high-end hockey players, and there's great outdoor ice generally in Calgary by this time of year. And yeah, somewhere during that lull, which occurs about 1 o'clock before everyone gathers for the Christmas meal around 4, there's an opportunity to go out and play. And sometimes Christmas has been bitterly cold here, but if you happen to catch the weather just right, and it's a couple of degrees below zero, and you just get out there and you play hockey for a couple of hours, it's exhilarating, and it just feels like a real Canadian Christmas moment. So
Yeah.
that's the tradition here
I
right now.
like
And
our bowling
fantastic.
replaced football. We used to do football on Christmas Eve, but once I hit 50 and a lot of my friends did the same age, we gave up the football and I settled into bowling.
I love the idea. Hopefully with my rink will be done, and we'll get a Christmas miracle of just cold enough to get some ice on Christmas Eve this year. I don't know. My rink's supposed to be done today, so we'll see.
All right.
I'm not very
Your
optimistic.
fingers crossed.
Not very optimistic. Yeah. So ours has pretty much been the same. For the last 15 years, or actually no, 20 years now. Gosh, I have gone to the Gallery in Philadelphia on Christmas Eve, which is a big shopping mall. Which in Philadelphia is not that close to me. It's like 35 minutes away, and I go to the mall and do all of my shopping on Christmas Eve morning, all of it. Now my wife hates this.
Okay.
She hates this because she thinks this is the most stressful thing you could possibly do to yourself, especially in this day and age. So we had to limit it to, now I have to at least leave a couple presents, and we do buy things ahead of time. But I've always done this, and the reason I went to the Gallery as a kid is it was the first mall I'd ever been to that had a food court in it, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I'd never seen, this was the first mall that had a food court in it. So it's probably been 30 years, like I'm losing track of time, but it's like we're going way back now, and I'm 46. So yeah, we're definitely 25 years, somewhere in there. And yeah, I just thought having a food court was the coolest thing. And then what I've done lately is I bought, because my wife's Jewish, we didn't really do a Christmas tree in our house, so we'd have the Christmas tree outside, which is really kind of cool. I told you about that. We open presents around a fire. And my kids have 8 nights of Hanukkah that lead up to Christmas, so they've been getting the last night of Hanukkah is Christmas Eve this year, which is like perfect for the children. So they just keep opening one present a night, and then my whole family comes over and bombards them with Christmas on Christmas Day. So the kids have no lack of presents here. But before the Christmas tree outside, I used to go to ShopRite, which is a local supermarket around the corner, and find a small, tiny Christmas tree, like a Charlie Brown-esque Christmas tree that wasn't going to get sold. It was like Christmas Eve, 5 o'clock. No one's going to buy this tree. It's been cut down for no reason. And I would always feel bad about that. I always feel bad about the trees that get cut down for no reason. And I would strap it to the top of my car with working Christmas lights and drive around the neighborhood with this. This was what I used to do. So we used to have that. Yeah, that was my Christmas. So let's get into the hockey. But that was fun. I appreciate all you guys. It's so funny how many I get all these emails, and people they want to hear more about just stuff like this, and I really appreciate it because we love talking about this. So let's get into the hockey though, and we'll start from here. So it's I will introduce the show, and then you guys can go in your normal order. See if you remember it. All right, it's the 22nd of December. It's Monday. Got it. Right? Yes. Hey, Hockey World, it's Monday, December 22nd, 2014.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today Sports.
And I'm Eric Duhacek of the Globe and Mail.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching the Cranky Hockey Writers Show on HockeyBuzz.com. This is our Christmas traditional show today because we're just 3 days from Old St. Nick starting his way around the world, and now you can track Santa on Twitter. NORAD's on Twitter, so just so you know, you can now track Santa officially on Twitter. And yeah, there's that. So you can get a tweet when.
How many followers does Santa have, by the way? Does Santa have like as many followers as Justin Bieber, or is that just
Santa? Well, it's funny. The first year they did it, I had more followers than Santa, and I made a big deal of that at our Christmas dinner. I've got more followers than Santa. Santa had like 75,000 followers. But now Santa's definitely passed me in followers. He's up closer to 1 million, I think. So yeah, Santa's got a lot of followers, which that's still low for Santa, I think. I think Santa's not properly using
Santa
facial.
Santa should be up there with pop stars and
I would say he's
Like
not using social marketing.
McKenzie's got more followers than Santa.
I would bet he does. I think social marketing,
Well,
social networking Mm,
He actually has more scoops than Santa, Bob
that's
McKenzie.
true. Well, Santa's not a scoop guy. Um, Bob
But
McKenzie,
I bet you
Bob,
Bob has been a lot more naughty than nice this year, and so who knows what
right?
he.
Yeah,
Remember, he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake, which is a little
Yeah,
creepy, but not
yeah.
terrible. Okay, so anyway, we'll move forward. We're going to talk today on the Cranky Hockey Radio show about captains. Last week we talked about coaches and had some great stories, and so this week we're going to talk about captains. Which, despite the fact that some NFL teams have decided to put C's on their sweaters, and even a few baseball teams, right? That the C on a hockey sweater still holds way more oomph than any other sport, and I'm always curious why. Why this is. Like, what is it about the captain in hockey that makes it so different and such a big honor? I mean, players really want this. I remember a couple years back when they named Claude Giroux captain. A lot of the players on the team here in Philly thought it was a little early to name him captain because it's a lot of pressure to put on a younger guy, and there's always that debate. He's your best player, but he'll eventually be your captain. So who do you give it to? But they end up giving it to him, and I was told because he really wanted it. Like, he actually wanted it. He wanted to be captain. So what do you think, Eric? What is the lore about this in this sport particularly?
It's a great question. It's absolutely a great question because you're 100% right. I mean, the role of the captains, let's see, I think has evolved in the 35 years that I've been doing it. But so let's talk about right now. Right now, most teams use the captain as a liaison between the coach and the players in the dressing room. So captains have to have I think that so much of it has to do with personality, because you're right, there's a tremendous amount of focus on the captain. The captain has to be able to be a reasonable person. He has to be somebody that has a great communication skills, so that when things are going poorly and the captain's sitting there in the coach's office for a half an hour, they have to be able to have a dialogue, and not everybody is capable of doing that. I mean, just as there are various different types of personalities in the world, there are various different types of personalities in the hockey dressing room, and so that's why someone like Jonathan Toews, I think, is an ideal captain, because he's competitive, so he shares a lot of the same values as the coach Joel Quenneville, and he has the respect of his teammates, because he is the guy that not only, you could argue that he's their best or one of their top 5 players, but no one is more competitive, and no one wants to win more, and no one is prepared to do more to win. So because of those qualities that he has, the players in the dressing room will rally around him. The coach shares the same set of values, and then he becomes that intermediary between the two groups. And you don't have to have those tete-a-tetes very often when things are going well, but every team hits a bump in the road once in a while. And so having someone that has this broad type of personality, I think, is a key to making any kind of a season successful.
Yeah, I agree, and I know it has changed over the years, because I know originally, and I don't know, somebody told me that this varies from team to team still, but the captains actually handed out the paychecks at one point, right? That was a big thing. Now, of course, with auto deposits and stuff like that, I'm sure, I wonder if they're still handing out like pay stubs or whatever. I don't know, but
they do organize things like the team meals when they go on the road. Half a dozen times a year, there are unofficial player functions, and the captain is required to organize those things. So yeah, you have to have somebody that is able to, at the very least, and this may sound simple, but somebody has to call ahead to the restaurant to book the rookie meal, and some of these guys are not capable of doing it. They're young and they're inexperienced, and they don't know how to get a hold of Morton's in Chicago if that's where the rookie meal is. So it's things like that. That's the 21st century equivalent of that. But I think that's and that, I mean, that's a really good point. That actually did happen. But I just think that it has more to do with sort of there has to be a link between the players on the ice and in the dressing room. There's just a sanctity to the dressing room, and most of the smart managers don't breach the sanctity of the dressing room. That is the players' place. Coaches will say that too. Coaches will go in the dressing room, but they, those pep talks that you see on those NHL 24/7 things, you can tell. I mean, they last about 60 seconds, and then the coaches are gone, and then it's the players' place. So someone has to be the liaison between that group on the ice, and then everybody else, the coaches, the assistant coaches, the training staff, the general manager, even the owner. And so that's, to me, the most important thing that a captain does. And I don't think you can I don't think you can understate that, the value of that, because I think teams that have good captains that make the right choices have successful seasons. I mean, to me, a great debate in Canada this year was what to do in Montreal with the captaincy and what to do in Ottawa with the captaincy. And in Montreal, they just determined that they were not ready to put the pressure of wearing the C on a single player, because the captaincy was vacant, and most people thought the easy choice would be to make that PK Subban. He's got this big, giant personality. And I'm convinced that the reason that they decided to share it among Subban, Pacioretty, and some of the other players and rotate it home and away was because they just did not want to put that on Subban at this stage in his career. And I really thought that Ottawa, and I remember writing this, so this isn't second guessing, but at the start of the season I said Ottawa should follow a similar thing. Obviously their captaincy opened up a couple times, first when Daniel Alfredson left and then after Jason Spezza left, and they eventually gave it to Erik Karlsson. And my thought was that Karlsson, coming off an injury-filled season like he did, he had a good year last year, but he'd had that terrible Achilles tendon injury, and he told me in the summer that he had, he really, for the first time, had a chance to work out the way he wanted to work out and get ready for the season. So I thought, great, what a perfect time to give him an A, give Kyle Turris an A, give Bobby Ryan an A, give Chris Phillips an A, rotate the thing, and let him concentrate on hockey for 1 year. And then, because he's going to be the captain eventually, I thought, but not right now. So they decided not to do that. They gave him the C, big ceremony, big press conference. He has not had a good year, and there was friction between him and Paul McLean, and I think that ultimately led to Paul McLean no longer being the coach there. So I thought that they made a precipitous choice and an unnecessary choice there, and I think that it has reflected on the kind of season that they're having. So you cannot understate this, and to the point that you'd raised in your preamble, sometimes it is too soon for a young guy, and sometimes you just have to wait until the right time, because you know who the captain is going to be in a lot of situations, but to force it on someone sooner than they're ready, like Tampa did with Vincent LeCavalier years and years ago, that backfires, and that ultimately hurts your team and undercuts what you're trying to accomplish.
I agree. Kevin?
Well, I agree fully with what Eric's depiction of the importance of the captain. I mean, it's a complicated role because you have to be both a warrior and a diplomat. You have to be a warrior on the ice. There's really no room for the perimeter player to serve the captain's role. He has to be someone who is willing to pay a price, because you must lead by example. But you also have to know, what to say and how to act. And I said this before on the other show that we did, but I think it's so important. Like, sometimes a bad performance by a captain or failure to do the right thing can really be costly for a team. And the best example of that is, when the Maple Leafs decided not to salute the fans. No one felt they had to do that, but it was the wrong timing. And a good leader, you think that would ever happen on a Jonathan Taves team or a Henrik Zetterberg team? No, it never would. These guys, would have had that under control and would have said, "Look, it's not the right timing on this. I agree with everyone on it, but we're just not going to do that because it'll put the team in a bad light." And it's a coach never truly knows what's going on in a room. Like, he may be able to read his team, and he may have a sense of what's happening, and assistant coaches know a little bit more because they can have closer relationships than a head coach because of the nature of the role. The only guy who truly knows what's going on at all times is the captain, and that's why I think it's so important in the NHL. Hockey is a chemistry sport, more so than any other sport. I don't think there's any question about that. That teams that have harmonious relationships seem to play better when there's a strict understanding of what needs to be done and what everyone's role is. And the coach certainly sets the cadence for that. But it's the captain who sort of implements it. And, we've seen the role through the years. Like, Bill Clement just told me a great story about during, I believe it was the Stanley Cup final, but it was certainly the playoffs. And he didn't think he could go. He had a knee injury. His knee injury was a mess, and he was sitting in the whirlpool. And Bobby Clark came and sat next to him and talked to him and said, look, you're so important to the team. Your penalty killing is just so crucial. And Bill said when Bobby Clark was done talking to him, he said he climbed out of that whirlpool and he was going to play, regardless of what kind of pain he was in, not because he was afraid of Bobby Clark, or not because that it was the greatest speech in the world, but Bob Clark made him feel important and essential, crucial, critical, and like he was a star player.
Right.
And it was the perfect way to get across. And I think good captains have that ability to sort of ascertain what each player needs. And, they give it to them. If they need a kick in the rear end, they can do that. If there's a player that responds to being criticized privately, or sometimes they just need to be patted on the back, some warm fuzzies passed their way.
Right.
So I think it's a great. Another story I remember too is, prior to the 2002 Olympic Games, after Herb Brooks was named coach of the U.S. Olympic team, he called me because he knew that I knew Chris Chelios pretty well, and he said, "Hey, Kevin, I just got the job, and I'm asking everyone's their opinions on Chris Chelios." He says, "I'm not even sure I'm even going to put him on the team." And I said, "Well," he says, "I don't know him that well." And I said, "Well, he's the Pied Piper of the American program, that they all follow him and so forth." And he said, "Well, I'm going to meet Chelios in Los Angeles, and we're going to talk about it." And about 4 or 5 days later, he calls me and he goes, "I just want to tell you that I sat down with Chris Chelios, and not only am I'm going to name him to the team, I'm going to make him my captain." He said, "I've never met anybody." He said, "I asked everybody what happened in 1998. And he said, everybody had theories, and they gave me little bits and pieces. When I sat with Chelios, he told me exactly what he thought had happened. And he talked about each individual player, and he had a great sense of what was going on in the room. He had a great sense of the strategy, and he said, I don't know that I've ever met a man who talked the role of captain better than Chris Chelios did." And of course, he did name Chelios as captain, and they won a silver medal. So I think there's such a tremendous value in having the right captain, and I think it's very important to an NHL team.
It's interesting, and it's great because when we see this, I love these stories, and we love to hear about the guys who know when to talk and know what to say. But then you look at guys like Carlson or Giroux and younger captains, and you ask yourself, I know Giroux better than I know Carlson, and Giroux's a wonderful guy. He's a great guy, but I don't see him as a psychologist. I don't see that as a part of his personality, and I don't see him pulling aside a guy like at the time. Like at the time Giroux was named captain, I was a big proponent of Kimmo Timonen being named captain because Kimmo was going to be around for a while, and with Carlson, like you said, Eric, I was kind of a proponent of Chris Phillips because these guys are going to be around for a few years. They've been around, but they're not going to be around forever because it's impossible to take the captaincy away in hockey. That's the other thing, right? So that's the other debate that ends up in this all the time. It's like you can't give a guy a captain if he's going to stay there forever, and the younger guy's coming up. Yeah. So this debate versus how good they are psychologically in handling the players and talking, and you go to the extremes of say Erik Karlsson or Andrew Ference, who is not a great player, but a really smart, probably a really psychologically strong guy to talk to. Where does that balance fall, Eric, in your thoughts?
Well, you raised so many good points there. I'm trying to decide which way to go first. Yeah. Let's start with the notion of getting that captaincy too young, because and Kevin, I think, probably knows this better than I do. When Mario Lemieux first came up, it was clear that he was going to be the captain of the Pittsburgh Penguins. But for the longest time, Dan Frawley was the captain of the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it was because the Penguins were taking the long view of this. They felt that that Mario Lemieux was trying to get better at English, so his, coming into the National Hockey League, his command of English was a little bit rocky, and it became, much better. But they just felt that A, he needed the time to grow into that role of being the young superstar, and B, he just needed time to become more familiar with the language. So they picked a heart and soul guy that most people who watch hockey have forgotten, and he was the transitional guy until they felt that Mario Lemieux was ready. And so then you can fast forward to the present, and when you think about the various things that Mario Lemieux did as a captain, the one that always came to mind with me, because it happened in Calgary, was prior to the 2002 Olympics, the Canadian Olympic team had assembled in Calgary, and they were at Father David Bauer, and under the terms of the rules were a little bit fuzzy at that time about whether you could actually practice or go on the ice or do anything in terms, right before the Olympic Games. And so, they weren't sure themselves, the coaching staff, how it would all unfold, because there was questions and concerns about insurance and various things like that. And so so they had a meeting, they gathered everybody there, and it was more of a preliminary, I forgot, on a Sunday night, on a preliminary talk, and then Mario Lemieux pulled out his skates and said, "Well, boys, I'm going on the ice." And and he did up his skates, and everybody looked around because they were looking for cues. And because Mario Lemieux was doing this, they all put on their skates. They went on the ice. There was about a dozen of us watching this thing. It was early September. Basically, Wayne Fleming was doing all the coaching, and Pat Quinn and Jacques Martin, Ken Hitchcock were standing there with Ken Dryden poses, and it was the most up-tempo practice that you've ever seen in your life. It was the first one of the year. It was some of the greatest hockey that that a couple of hundred people in the building were watching, and it was all because Mario Lemieux just decided that he was going to go on the ice, contrary to what had been whispered in his ear by various people on the sideline, and everybody else followed suit, and that was it. And from then on, they ran like 3 full-scale practices and reassembled 6 months later in Salt Lake City, and eventually won a gold medal, starting pretty badly. But it's to your point about you don't have to always have the the long, thoughtful speech. Sometimes it's a small act like that that demonstrates what a captain can bring to a team, or an emerging team in this particular case.
Right, that makes sense. Kevin,
what's interesting too is, like, I don't like the idea that the best player should always be the captain. And, there's a tendency now to look in that direction. Yeah. And I don't always like that. I mean, in many cases, it is the obvious choice. If that player I mentioned is both a warrior and a diplomat. But the point I wanted to break up is, I talked about what the ideal captain is, but rarely do we find the perfect psychologist and warrior and everything else. Generally, it's a compromise. And the way I would look at it is, anybody who watches war movies or knows anything about the military knows that oftentimes a platoon will have a inexperienced West Pointer at the head, who's never seen any action or hasn't been around. He's book taught, and he comes and they put him in the head of a platoon. The key is obviously to have the grizzled sergeant, okay. And I think that's what happens sometimes in these cases. I think it will work if you have a younger captain, as long as he's surrounded by a good cabinet, a good council,
right,
kind of help him through it. Because sometimes you just don't have the right guy. And as Eric mentioned, you're better off just to have 4 guys in a leadership cabinet. I agree with what he said about Montreal. Don't force it.
Right.
If you don't have the guy, then wait it out until you do have the guy. And let's look at one of the greatest captains in NHL history, and you can almost make a case that he was the best captain. Steve Yzerman was not a deliverer of Newt Rockne type speeches, but what he did was he played on one leg, and he threw himself in front of shots, and he sort of inspired his team, and everybody knew when Steve wasn't happy, and nobody wanted to disappoint him. And there was a great sense, because of that he was a leader. You watch the way he played and everything else. Now, Taves, in my mind, can do all that. Plus, he also knows what to say. That's why I think he is he's sort of, in my mind, the ideal captain. Another great captain, and Eric knows this as well, Mark Messier, I thought, was the ultimate captain. He could speak. Yeah. I remember I asked him about, because he was always accessible. A lot of people were intimidated by Messier, but not journalists. We loved him because, you'd go and talk to him, you'd get a straight answer. And I asked him once why he was able or willing to do so many interviews. He said, because if I do them, I take the pressure off my teammates. They don't have to answer. If we, as a team, don't play well, I feel it's my responsibility. And I think this is the responsibility of the captain to explain why. And he said, if I explain why it's happening, then the other guys, don't feel the need or don't have to answer that question. It should be just up to me to explain it. And I thought, geez, what a great approach, because I think that's accurate.
That's perfect, and that transitions into my next thought, which is that one of the responsibilities of captains is addressing the media after games right away, and often after losses. And often these guys are on the ice at the end of these games, and they're tired, and they're coming right out, and they're being thrown to the wolves right away. I've seen guys like Peter Forsberg was really good at it. I've seen, Chris Pronger was really good at it. Giroux is good at it, but he can tell that it's still a new ball of wax there. I think the relationship we talked about, the relationship with the teams and the players, but also the relationship that the media has with captains is really a vital thing as well. Eric, talk about some of those thoughts.
Well, I'll start with Mark Messier then, because Kevin brought him up, because I covered the Oilers, in the first decade of Messier's career, and the thing about it is that I think a lot of people feel that Messier was, a great captain, fully formed, hatched from the womb, and in fact, in the early days, the two. Gretzky was obviously the captain of the Oilers, and the two players that essentially took the leadership role in the early days were Wayne Gretzky and Kevin Lowe. And both, Glenn Anderson and Mark Messier were completely different. They didn't feel that they had a responsibility to the media. Glenn Anderson was impossible. I mean, you couldn't pin him down for an interview at all. I mean, I knew him from the Canadian Olympic team and knew him a little better than the Edmonton writers, and they would always wait for me to get to Edmonton and say hello to Anderson, and everyone would crowd around because it was the only way to get him talking. I also remember Messier coming into the dressing room once in '81 or '82, putting on a pair of sunglasses. Gentlemen, I have nothing to say. Flashes that big Mark Messier smile and then walks out of the dressing room. So the go-to guys in that room were Gretzky, of course, because he was always like that. But people forget that Kevin Lowe was the same. He was a guy that you could go to, and he would have thoughtful answers. And people always complained that that in the early days, the two people, you kept hearing those same two voices over and over again, and gradually over time, Messier's voice emerged, and Paul Coffey's voice emerged too. These were guys that ended up going from from guys that didn't have a whole lot to say to having a lot to say, and some of the guys never really got very good. Glenn Anderson, was a tremendous hockey player, and he was one of those heart and soul guys, but he was never somebody that you could go to get a State of the Union of the team. Yari Curry, same thing, a very wonderful and cooperative guy, but just never felt comfortable enough in the language to utter more than cliches. And Grant Fuhr too. Like Grant Fuhr in the beginning, might blurt stuff out that would get himself into trouble, and he often did that. But it took a long time for him to be a guy that could give you thoughtful answers. And so I do think that that's a part of what a great captain does. I'll never forget watching a playoff game when Doug Risebrough was the captain of the Calgary Flames, and this was still in the era where players fled the dressing room and people had to fetch them out of the back room, which was off limits to the media. And Risebrough made a giveaway on a goal that ended up being the one that cost them the game. And it seems to me it was a playoff game. It was some critical moment in a critical series, and there was no doubt that the puck that Risebrough threw away ended up on someone's stick, ended up in the net. They lose 2-1. So we're all milling around waiting for the dressing room to open, wondering, okay, who's going to be in there? Because it was a heart-wrenching loss. And sure enough, we went in there, and the dressing room was completely empty except for one guy, Doug Risebrough. He sat there at his locker stall. Now, he didn't make it easy for anyone. So, like the days now where, reporters sometimes go up, Doug, talk about the blah, 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 or someone will, make a statement that's a non sequitur. Like Doug Risebrough wanted somebody, you had to ask a specific question, so, he's looking around waiting. I go, Doug, what were you seeing? What were you thinking of on that play? What did you see? And he went through it, and then, I did a follow-up question, and he answered, and another follow-up question, and he answered, and he looked around, and he wasn't going to make it easy. No one else was asking a question. Okay, thanks, and he left. And he, I thought, wow, that was so professional, because he knew that we wanted to talk to him. He knew he had to answer for it, but he was, like I say, he was not going to make it easy. Ask a question, show some courage, or else, you're out of luck. And so, I mean, I just think that that's, to me as a reporter, in the context of what you're asking, that's what you want. You know, somebody that understands what the role is, understands why we're there asking it, and you don't have to make it easy. Make us squirm a little bit. That doesn't bother me at one little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, because I know a lot of reporters. I've heard a lot of reporters who complain the opposite of you, and I like that. I like the fact that you take that angle, because I've always felt the same thing. Their job, it's great when they appreciate our job, that we have a job to do and we have to talk to them, and some of them don't, but most of them do. But I also think that you should have to work for it. You should have to ask something interesting or get out. Chris Pronger was very classic when I covered him with that. If somebody asked him something that was stupid, he would tell them that was a stupid question and move on. He wouldn't sit there and answer just how does it feel to lose tonight. That wasn't going to work with Chris Pronger. You had to have something specific. But go ahead, Kevin.
Chris Pronger liked to vent, and sometimes he would accuse someone of asking a stupid question that really wasn't a stupid question at all. It was a question he didn't want to answer.
Right.
But the thing about Pronger is you could go back at him and say, no, that's not a stupid question, Chris, because here's what I'm getting at. This happened and that created this. So that's why I'm asking. So don't dodge the question because you don't want to answer it. And then he'd laugh and he would answer it. And so I do think that's a different tactic. What has happened in this day and age, unfortunately, is that because players get so much media training right now, the message, 80% of the people that are in the scrum are broadcast media, and they need a soundbite. So ideally, they want that soundbite to be something interesting. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be. They have to produce a soundbite. Kevin and I are in a different part of the bit. We need interesting answers. We do an auto filter, right? Blah, 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 blah. No, can't use it. Blah, 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 blah. No, can't use it. Blah, blah, blah. Can't use it. And then eventually, maybe somebody says something used, because we have a radar that goes off when you actually hear an interesting response. But the fact is, players don't feel that they have to answer in an interesting manner anymore, because they know that most of those people just want a soundbite. They just want 40 seconds of something that they can put on the air, and that's why if you watch SportsCenter or the Canadian equivalent of SportsCenter, for an hour, your eyes will glaze at the in numbness over the complete inarticulateness or just the silliness, the self-evident nature of the answers. We have to give 100 tries. The cliches. I don't even have to repeat them. So that's the part that drives me crazy, and that is unfortunately how our business has evolved in the last 10 to 20 years. And it's once the genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to get it back in.
Yeah. Well, Kevin.
I'll add this to it too, and this is not anything to do with the subject. It's just about journalism, and I've made this observation and mentioned to some of my colleagues and to my family. Sometimes it depends who you are of what kind of answer you're going to get. I've noticed certainly through the years that as a national reporter, I could ask a question and get a good answer. Where if someone asked that same question, if they were a local guy or an inexperienced guy or a guy that they didn't recognize or didn't know, they wouldn't get the same kind of answer. And the other thing which I find interesting, which I think speaks to the type of guys who play hockey, the older I've gotten, the better my answers have gotten. Like, I can ask, when I was young and I asked a tough question, I might have gotten barked at. But now that I'm older, like, players are more respectful. It's like they respect their elders. If you're an old reporter and you've been around and you look like you've been around, even if they don't know who you are, they'll give you a decent answer. They won't be disrespectful. Where a young guy, they'll just kind of blow you off sometimes. But I think it speaks to the type of guys they are. They were brought up to respect their elders, and they do. You get kind of different answers. But I wanted to bring up on the idea of captaincy too. Again, Yzerman, I think, was a great captain, but he didn't speak after every game. That was not his style. He did not enjoy the media process. I don't think he still likes the media process. But he would talk 5, 6, 8 times a year, and when he did, great answers. Very intelligent man. And he was like Eric described, though. You had to ask him good questions. You can't just ask him to, say, hey, that 500th goal tonight, how did you feel? That's not good enough, for Steve Eiserman. So, he was a very complicated guy. He was a thoughtful guy, an intelligent guy, but he didn't come out and face the music every day to say the way that Marc Messier did later in his career. And I agree about what Eric said about Marc Messier. This was, the captain I was talking about was the older Marc Messier. The guy who marched into Chicago Stadium and cut everybody in sight and led his team to a victory that ultimately led to a Stanley Cup. That's the Marc Messier I was speaking, not the young guy that grew up in Edmonton.
Yeah.
And Marc Messier will tell you that it was from watching the way Wayne Gretzky dealt with the press and how he handled that was the reason that he figured it out eventually himself.
Now that's interesting. Now the final thing is de facto captains. I wanted to ask you about this because there is another thing that goes on in NHL locker rooms, that these guys are guys that don't wear letters on their jerseys and almost don't have to, and almost don't. I don't know if they want to say they don't want to, but they don't really care if they do or not. But these are and a lot of times these are the support groups we were talking about before. And again, I bring up Pronger in this case because when Mike Richards was captain here in Philly, Pronger was kind of the de facto captain. And at times that rubbed Mike Richards the wrong way. And Richie couldn't handle it as well as he should have perhaps. But you can't just take a Chris Pronger. It doesn't matter if he's got a C or an A on his shirt. He's going to act the same way all the time. Can you think of any de facto captains?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me start by answering something that Dave King, former coach of the Canadian Olympic team, told me. Dave always believed that in every dressing room there were circles of leadership. And he said sometimes you would be surprised who was in the circle of leadership. So it would start with the captain at the center, and he said, and then there would be a circle of leadership around the captain, and then there would be rings. So imagine rings around the various, in this diagram or schematic that I'm. And often he said that it was that second circle of leadership where you would get surprising people. So, if you look around the National Hockey League, there are a lot of fans that might say, Vernon Fiddler, what does he bring to the room? Why does Vernon Fiddler always have a job? And the reason is that Vernon Fiddler, on most teams that he's played in, is part of that second circle of leadership. He's a heart and soul guy. He's not an especially skilled guy, but he wins some faceoffs. He's gritty. He's the Bill Clement, essentially, of this generation. And he's a guy that matters to winning. And I remember, I think, it seems to me that it was Barry Trotz talking about Vernon Fiddler once. I think it was after they let him go, and the sense was that the minute we lost this guy, we started a search to find another guy just like him, and it's just hard to do. It's impossible to do in a lot of respects. So there are an awful lot of what you're talking about, de facto captains, people who contribute to the leadership group that that you don't ever hear of and that don't make a lot of money. But I think that if you look around at who plays a long time in the National Hockey League, eventually once the skills start to erode and it becomes, there's a whole pool of players that you can choose from on the edge of your roster. Vernon Fiddler always seems to have a job. Travis Moan always seems to have a job. These are guys that continue to play in the National Hockey League at a point where their skills might be receding, and it's because teams value the leadership contributions that they bring.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kevin?
Yeah, well, I think of a couple of guys. The guy who's in Florida right now who was on Boston, Sean Thornton, was a guy that was, in the room. Everybody liked him. Did play a prominent, or did play a role in the success, but not, was a fourth liner. But, he stood up for his guys. And guys liked him and they respected him. And I always felt he was part of that leadership group. And the other guy who's a prominent player, but he's not the captain on his team, is Drew Doughty. When you go and watch Los Angeles and you watch that team go, he's a very inspirational player. He's good all the time. He's in all three zones. People know that on that team know that they go as he goes. I think they have a great deal of trust in him. He's still young, but I sense he answers the bell after the games. He's a talker. And usually knows what's going on to the team. I think he's kind of a guy in the background that's sort of growing, into that role. And the other guy I'm going to bring up, now this is kind of an unusual thing, and this is under the category of there are guys we identify early on that we just know are going to be captains of their team. And there's already one guy in the league right now that I just know, and I actually quoted someone who said exactly the same thing, but I think most people know this without him saying it, and that's Zemgus Girgensons of the Buffalo Sabres. You watch who he is, and you watch how he plays, and you watch how he conducts himself, and you just know that at some point he's going to be the Buffalo Sabres captain. He plays a hard, edgy style. Right. He's very confident. He's a rah-rah, gung-ho guy. This is a guy who wrote a letter when he was 14 years old from Latvia to a team in Vermont and said, I want to come over to America and I want to play. He's as American as I am now. Everything about him just screams that he is going to be a leader for a lengthy period of time, just as people said when Gabriel Landeskog was 18 years old he was going to be a captain. Girgensons may not be able to score at the same level as Landeskog, but he has, in my mind, already at 20 the traits of a leader.
That's an interesting call. Yeah, that's really good. I have not heard that much about him, but I've heard people speak very highly of him like that.
Hey, Kevin, sorry, I'm doing something on Girgensons this week because I was trying to debate in my own mind whether I liked the fact that he was leading the All-Star voting or didn't like the fact that he was leading the All-Star voting. Right. And really, I've never met him, but you see the way he conducts himself, you see the way he acts in interviews, and there is a gravitas to him as a young guy that is admirable. Just the fact that he's got the right mixture of polite embarrassment about this and pride in the fact that that all this ballot box stuffing is going on in Latvia. And I think that one of the charming things about this year's All-Star game is going to be the fact that this guy is going to be in the starting lineup. And you could argue, if you want to base it on statistics or analytics, that while he's having a good season, he is the third or fourth best player on the fourth worst team in the National Hockey League, and there are probably players who are more deserving of that honor. But I'll betcha he's a guy, like nowadays when you go to the All-Star game, there's an awful lot of players who've been at a bunch who are really looking for a reason not to go. I'll wager that he is one guy that will really cherish the opportunity to go to Columbus, represent his team, represent his country. And so, at the end of the day, even though it seems stupid and crazy and whatnot, I love the fact that this is happening. I don't mind it at all, and I think that there will come a time in his career when he makes the All-Star team on merit, not just because somebody decided to vote for him 10 times a day in Riga.
I love it too, for a little bit of a different reason. My take on it is this: there are people who are All-Stars. We know who those guys are because Eric and I vote for them. They're the guys who have the All-Star distinctions at the end. Those are the official All-Stars. That's different to me than the guys we vote in to play in the All-Star game that the fans vote in. Like people say, well, it's a popularity contest. Well, guess what? It's supposed to be as popularity. These are the fans who say, look, we want these guys, and if this group in Latvia gets organized, more power to them. This is supposed to be fun. Right. It is fun. This is a great story and a great kid, and the assessment that Eric has him is right on the money. He's, he's just upbeat about that. I talked to Jim Montgomery, who coached him. He played on a line with Johnny Gaudreau, right, in United States Hockey League, and Montgomery has so many stories about him. How, he in the championship game, he said, I watched Girgensons' first shift, and I knew we were going to win. He said he just wasn't going to be denied. And when you have that level of player that says, this guy's a special player, he scored he had a high ankle sprain. We all know how difficult those are to deal with, and he ended up scoring a hat trick in a big game on a high ankle sprain. Yes. And Montgomery told me, who coached him in the United States Hockey League, he's Denver's coach now, and in college hockey, he just said, I've never seen anybody do anything like that. And he told stories about how he was so shy in his first year there that he asked all of his players to make sure that to tell a story about what they liked best about their summer. He couldn't even do it. He said, but by the end of that season, he had a movie camera and he was leading the team in practical jokes and taking pictures of everyone. He just evolves so quickly as a player, and he also had his players put down about what they believe their best traits were. In both years, Gergensen's wrote, "I will never be outworked by anybody else on the ice."
Oh,
Now,
wow.
to me, that's a guy that you
Yeah.
want.
That's a great story. Well, this has been a great, really incredibly fast hour again. Thank you guys so much for doing this, and thanks all for watching the show. We're on usually Mondays. I guess we'll be on next Monday. I will be in. Yeah, I'll be here Monday. We can do next Monday. Probably next Monday. We'll talk about. We'll decide soon. We'll let you guys know. I'm going to Nashville for the weekend. I'm going to take my family for the first time to see a Predators game down there, just because it's such a cool thing to do, and I've been wanting to do that forever. So we're going on Friday. We're leaving the day after Christmas and coming back on Sunday night. The Flyers are playing there Saturday night, so the family wanted to go see that. So it's going to be fun. In all of Nashville's fun irony, they are making it Shea Weber bobblehead night when the Flyers come to town. So I thought that was pretty funny. Pretty good sense of humor on the Predators' part there. So yeah. So we'll see you guys soon. Remember you can check out Eric at the Globe and Mail and Kevin at USA Today. And if you're not reading their stuff, you're just not reading about hockey. So make sure you check it out. We'll talk to you soon. Without the buzz, it is just hockey. Talk to you then.